Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the webinar channel of the Association of Certified eDiscovery Specialists. My name is Mike Quadraro. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we are joined by our partner, eDiscovery today, the wonderful Doug Austin, for a webinar entitled Foundational eDiscovery, Optimizing the Left Side of the EDRM. We will get into the presentation in a minute. If you have not already, please go to eDiscoverytoday.com and subscribe to Doug's prolific blog for all the latest and the greatest in the eDiscovery space. Before we get started, please know we love questions. We're happy to take questions. You can submit your questions using the chat, or if you prefer the Q&A module on the bottom of your screen, there you get the option to submit your question anonymously. Also, if you'd like a copy of today's slide deck, we will make it available in the resource widget. Without further delay, I'm super excited to bring Doug Austin into view and ask him to please take the presentation from here. Doug, please take it away.
Thanks, Mike. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the ACEDS webinar on Foundational eDiscovery, Optimizing the Left Side of the EDRM. Over the next hour, we'll discuss core challenges in eDiscovery and information governance and how a foundational approach to eDiscovery can help address those challenges. Before we begin, as Mike noted, please note we do welcome questions. You can submit those either via the Q&A tab or the chat tab at the bottom of your screen. And Mike said that a copy of the slides should be available in the resources tab, but sometimes we've had some challenges with that. If it's not there or you can't get to it, don't worry, as we will be sending a copy of the slides out after the webinar. We have a terrific panel here today to discuss these topics, so let me introduce them. Nirav Shah serves as corporate counsel eDiscovery at the Home Depot, where he provides crucial legal guidance, manages external counsel and vendors, and advises on best practices. His role encompasses overseeing eDiscovery across various legal domains, including commercial litigation, class actions, general liability, intellectual property, employment, tax, and real estate. Nirav is recognized as a thought leader in legal technology, frequently speaking at conferences, educational forums, and webcasts. He also serves on the planning committee for the University of Florida Law eDiscovery Conference, contributing to the field's educational advancements. Previously, he was a senior discovery attorney at Troutman Sanders and a director at FTI Consulting's Technology Group. Nirav holds dual degrees from the University of Michigan and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. His career is marked by a commitment to excellence and innovation in eDiscovery. Welcome, Nirav.
Thanks, Doug.
Brandon D'Agostino is the Vice President of Product at Cloudficient, where he leads the development and execution of the company's product strategy. Brandon has over 15 years of experience in the legal technology industry in a variety of client-focused and executive leadership roles. He also teaches eDiscovery as an adjunct professor at the Charleston School of Law and is the co-author of Foundational eDiscovery, A Practical Guide to Early Case Management. Brandon is a member of the South Carolina Bar Association and holds additional certifications in eDiscovery and cloud computing. Hello, Brandon.
Hi. Hi, Doug.
Bobby Malhotra is a member of Winston's Artificial Intelligence Strategy Group and focuses on navigating complex eDiscovery, digital forensics, cross-border and data privacy issues in high-stakes litigation and investigations using his unique combination of both hands-on technical skill and 2 decades of business and litigation experience. True techno lawyer, he uses his technical knowledge and legal expertise to serve clients across numerous sectors and industries. Bobby serves as a trusted eDiscovery advisor to Fortune 500 clients, and in this role, he provides counseling and guidance in connection with legally defensible and standardized company-wide discovery practices. Hi, Bobby.
Hey, Doug. Excited to be here.
Great. Me too. And I am Doug Austin, who will be your foundational eDiscovery point guard for this webinar. I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, which is a daily blog about eDiscovery, cybersecurity, data privacy, information governance, and AI trends, best practices, and case law. I've been providing consulting and project management services in the legal space for over 30 years, so I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. Now, I've been daily blogging for 15 years, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. So here's what we'll be talking about today. We'll begin by discussing what foundational eDiscovery is with the help of Brandon, who, as I mentioned during the introductions, co-wrote a book on the topic. Then we'll go in depth into core challenges impacting organizations from an eDiscovery and InfoGov standpoint. We'll then discuss the growing importance of the left side of the EDRM model and how organizations are looking to shift the emphasis more to the left. And finally, we'll address strategic approaches and emerging solutions to the challenges based on the foundational concepts we've discussed, as well as other best practices and technology solutions. As I mentioned, we'll look to save time for questions at the end, but we'll address them along the way if we can. And we certainly encourage you to contribute to the discussion via the chat if you feel inclined to do so. Of course, any ideas expressed by us here are our own, not those of our organizations, clients, or partners. Disclaimers are a foundational part of protecting them from our comments here. So let's start our discussion today by talking about the book Brandon co-wrote and the concepts it discusses that can help improve your eDiscovery processes. You see a picture of the book there on the left and a couple of high-level bullet points about it, as well as a link at the bottom if you want to consider purchasing the book. Also, by the way, thanks to Brandon and John Price for allowing me to write the foreword to the book. So Brandon, what is foundational eDiscovery, and what are some takeaways from the book that the audience should know about?
Yes, I think foundational discovery. When we coined the term at Cloudficient, and then that gave us the idea to write the book, was really, if you think about the EDRM kind of going left to right, a lot of decisions get made on the left side that severely impact the right side and can lead to cost overruns and having to go back to the well, as it were. From a collection standpoint, motions, disputes, that kind of thing that can arise out of it. And so we kind of thought of it, as almost turning the EDRM up on its head and going, bottom to top, and thinking of it truly as a foundation as you would a house, right? And thinking about what is modern information governance, what does that look like? At a time when we see things like the consumerization of IT, as I call it, which is really departments more and more are going for best of breed applications, which takes data outside of the traditional kind of vanilla productivity suite like an M365 into lots of other repositories. And then post pandemic and even pre-pandemic, we were seeing more of a what I think of as a work-life integration, where people are, they're doing business at the soccer field, watching their kids, play a game or something, and much more data moving over potentially personal communication applications and mobile devices, and links being shared because it's easier to do that when you're mobile. It creates kind of a new paradigm that we have to get our heads around. And then I think the third piece is eDiscovery may have blazed the trail, but things like breach response, DSARs, privacy, compliance audits, all of those things borrow from the eDiscovery playbook in a lot of ways. And so I think if you can kind of think about where all the commonality from all those different workflows comes together, and then looking at what a sound information governance strategy would be like. And then I think that the real kind of the other motivation for writing the book was just that people outside of the folks who might attend an ACEDS webinar need to know about eDiscovery. People in IT need to know about it. Associates coming out of law school need to know about it if they weren't able to take a class. Paralegals, people who are in privacy and compliance roles. There's a lot that they could learn from eDiscovery. So we were hoping that the book would give that, foundational as a dual purpose in the title, is giving them the foundation that they need to help support all those workflows.
Yeah, makes sense. So Brandon, regarding the second bullet point, despite the increased dialogue about InfoGov in recent years, many organizations are still pretty reactive when it comes to discovery. So why do you think that is, and what can be done to change the paradigm for those organizations?
Yeah, I think at some point and this may have had to do with the move to cloud, and more SaaS than data center heavy applications. IT has kind of changed, and how we manage IT has changed. That has impacts on eDiscovery, and so I think information governance started to take on different meanings, and maybe kind of got a little bit away from eDiscovery, or they kind of drifted a bit. And then I've talked to people, different customers and friends in the industry, and I think we see, well, some organizations, cases they seem sort of bespoke every time, right? It's a new set of custodians, it's a new team, it might be new data sources, and a lot of that is reactive. But at the same time, we see a surprising amount of data moving through the same process over and over again, right? That same custodian's mailbox going through multiple iterations of processing, maybe even at different vendors, loaded into different review platforms, having different types of AI applied to it. It's these, multiplication of cost. And I think that to get a handle on this, again, we have to start thinking about how people work today. I think Microsoft coined a phrase, modern work, and they use that. I think that's actually the name of a team at Microsoft, and describes a suite of their products. But that really has changed. And I think that those other points that I mentioned earlier, understanding how your people work, and maybe, in between the cases, not that eDiscovery professionals have a ton of free time on their hands, but to the extent that we have any, we start to understand how the business works, and so that we can plan for that case that, involves a team you've never worked with before, or a type of data that you've not worked with before. At least we have a plan. And then as major IT things happen, right, major events, migrations, digital transformation initiatives, that the eDiscovery team or legal team is plugged in to understand how those changes are going to impact, processes and playbooks and things like that you may have already developed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if we're lucky, we work half days, any 12 hours we want each day, right? So Nirav, the third bullet point talks about cross-functional collaboration as an important factor in eDiscovery success. So from a corporate in-house perspective, what are you looking to accomplish from a cross-functional collaboration perspective, and what are the challenges keeping you from getting there?
Yeah, cross-functional, right? You can define it in a couple of different ways. For me, it's both cross-functional inside the corporation, but also cross-functional with my partners. No corporation does eDiscovery fully by themselves. At a minimum, you're working with outside counsel. Oftentimes, you're working with your service provider partners or others. And frankly, in the best of scenarios, you might even extend collaboration to the opposing parties or the government or whoever you're responding to. So it is an important factor, right? You're not a silo. No matter what, you're going to need help and participation from other people, whether it's in-house people on the forensic side to help you collect data, if it's somebody on the legal team to loop you into a case, tell you what's going on. It could be executive leadership, right, to get you buy-in on certain processes or workflows or technology upgrades. So it really is an important factor. And there are a lot of challenges, right? The more people you have sitting at the table, the harder it can be to sort of advance the whole process. But I don't know that it's optional, right? I don't know that cross-functional collaboration is really something that we can avoid, setting aside that we shouldn't seek to avoid it. But even if you were inclined to lone wolf it, I just don't, I don't even think it's an option anymore.
No, I agree. Yeah, at this point, it's only the question of the degree at how far you collaborate, really. So that's the corporate perspective. Bobby, from your perspective as outside counsel, what's the importance of cross-functional collaboration and communications and working with your clients?
Thanks, Doug. And I'm going to pick up on some of the points that Brandon and Nirav kind of hit, because I think it applies in many different contexts. As outside counsel, cross-functional collaboration is not a nice to have, it's essential. It's essential to ensuring that legal strategy aligns with operational realities. The fact is, when legal, IT, compliance, and business units are communicating effectively, from my perspective, discovery becomes more efficient, defensible, and less disruptive. And it's not just discovery. I mean, even in my counseling practice, the collaboration effort is very important. It allows us to anticipate challenges, as I said earlier, achieve operational synergies. It better helps us tailor kind of preservation strategies. And most importantly, there's enough surprises going on, mitigates the chances and avoids those costly surprises by having kind of cross-functional collaboration. And the main thing I think here to understand is that, and Brandon touched on this, and so did Nirav, the main thing to understand is that the eDiscovery world is so intertwined with other functions such as AI, compliance, data privacy, security, information governance, that it's just not prudent or efficient to do things in silos. And I would say it's borderline malpractice on the outside counsel side to kind of operate in silos, because you could be missing key information that allows you to make strategic decisions and avoid full pause in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's I like to say eDiscovery isn't just about litigation anymore, and it hasn't been for a long time. So absolutely couldn't agree more. So I probably don't have to tell you there's a ton of challenges for organizations these days related to eDiscovery and InfoGov. In fact, if you didn't know that, you probably wouldn't even be attending this webinar. The fact that this slide has more bullet points than any other in the deck demonstrates that. And I think one of the challenges, which you all probably well know, is the explosion of data in the world. The volume, velocity, and variety of big data is bigger and more diverse than ever. And the graph from Statista on the screen illustrates just how big it's gotten and is expected to get. There's already over 90 times the amount of data in the world that existed just 15 years ago. And it's expected to more than double again in 3 years to nearly 200 times as much data by 2028. So Nirav, from your experience, how has the proliferation of data complicated the issuance and maintenance of legal holds?
Yeah, I mean, legal holds are, again, this is kind of theoretical. Maybe step back, right? From a corporate perspective, the idea of any kind of data map, it's a utopian fantasy, right? I mean, Brandon discussed, right, best in breed and people using all kinds of tools and data sources and working in different places. So the idea that as a corporation, you would have a actual clean map or even a good sense of where the data is within your corporation is a fantasy. So stop, right? We all just need to stop there and start working from a position of what is reasonable, what is defensible, and what helps us meet our obligations. And I think part of that involves you have to spend the time upfront working with your outside counsel to understand what is this case about, what are the data sources relevant to this case, and how can we go about satisfying our obligations regarding preservation, collection, all of those things. And that is separate and apart from any sort of work you might do internally in terms of data governance, InfoGov, data loss prevention. Those are all entirely separate issues that do touch upon what I do as eDiscovery counsel, because it really is data, right? I mean, I should just be data counsel at this point because eDiscovery is such a small part of what I do. But it is, right? Legal hold is always still going to be foundational. It starts there by identifying your sources and preserving them so that they are available, both for your own use, right? I mean, I might need this data to win my own case. And in addition to what data and what my obligations are to produce to the other side, to the court, to the government.
Okay. So I love Tom's comment. Yes, data mapping is like world peace. Nice concept, but not a reality. That's pretty funny.
Doug,
Yeah.
can I chime in there though?
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree that there's no such thing as a perfect data map. Many organizations don't have necessarily a comprehensive and sometimes not even reliable data map. But as outside counsel, I'll take what you can provide me. I can tell you that there have been, significant data mapping efforts in response to various privacy legislation over the last decade that you're required to do under CCPA, CPRA, GDPR, et cetera. And in the eDiscovery context, in the information governance context, utilizing those, whatever's available, is tremendously helpful. It gets you a starting point. So even if you're 75% accurate and you can understand at least where critical sensitive PII exists within certain repositories, you are one step ahead in the ballgame in negotiating your protective order and understanding, for example, what types of data may be applicable in downstream discovery. So I don't want to gloss over the fact, I do agree with Nirav and others, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that whatever is available is helpful to us as outside counsel as we're representing clients.
And I mean,
Yeah.
it is similar to data governance, right? It is a big thing and it's very scary and it's constantly changing. But Debbie made a good point in the chat, like start somewhere, do something. And even if you take small bites at it, but don't be so put off by the scariness and the scale of it all that you just don't do anything.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, as with many of the things we were talking about, reasonableness is the standard, not perfection. So couldn't agree more. So Nirav, one of the things you mentioned in our prep call is that legal hold innovation is stagnated. So why do you think that is?
I think part of it has to do with, I think there's maybe a lack of appreciation outside of the corporate space for how important the left side of the EDRM is to us. There's a lot of focus and innovation put into data processing, data review, document review, presentation of data, whether it's production or privilege logs, right? There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of money being spent by a lot of people in our industry leveraging Gen AI and improving those processes. And I don't think there's as much investment on the left side. And I think part of that is twofold, right? A, I don't think people realize how important it is to us on the corporate side. And B, I'm not sure that the financial incentives are there. And I don't want to make any judgments to many of our partners and people in our industry, but creating the best legal hold tool and the money that you might make from that may not be the same as if you do data hosting and document review and you get one big second request. So I get it, right? I understand everyone, people have to make money, right? Home Depot doesn't exist other than we want to make money. So I would never judge anyone otherwise. But I think the incentives aren't there to improve the technology. And so you really have to rely on best practices and workflows and, using the tools you to the best of your ability.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So speaking of kind of the whole data challenges and data mapping and what have you, and changing of data, Brandon, eDiscovery has historically revolved around custodians and custodial data. So how has that changed and how are those changes causing challenges for organizations?
Yeah, I think you think back to the days when it was mailboxes and file servers, and the non-custodial data sources would be file shares or document management systems. It's definitely much more complex now, and I think the idea that the advent of collaboration technologies caused some issues where I may be modifying documents that live in Doug's OneDrive, and I think there have been some growing pains with that on some of the eDiscovery tools, looking at if I am the custodian, Doug's OneDrive may not get preserved in a legal hold, right? So that needs to be taken into account. And so one of the things that we're looking at Cloudficient is how does user behavior influence legal hold and that sort of data mapping, even at a case level, understanding what might be important based on the custodians I've looked at, and one day being able to take that a step further and say, it's kind of the e-commerce thing, like, well, if you like Doug, you're really going to like Nirav, and And if you like this document, you're really going to like this other document, because we know that the same people that access this document almost as frequently, right? Those are the kinds of things that I think. I agree that the data mapping as the utopian concept is going to be untenable, and it may be now, but it certainly will be in the future. And so you almost have to take a an evidence-based approach that is sort of derivative of what you start somewhere, then you can build from there. So we look at things like user activity logs. These are things that cybersecurity teams can do. So why shouldn't we do it in eDiscovery? And you can even look at identity, right? And when you use single sign-on, your single sign-on provider records every login and log out, every access of an application if it's registered with that provider. So many people are probably using Azure AD or Intra now. Could I not look at those and query that information to learn what types of applications was Doug logging into, and now a lot of those logs are only kept for a certain period of time. So it depends on the organization's, posture with that in terms of cybersecurity. How long do they keep them, to investigate breaches and things like that. But that's another area where, kind of stepping across an aisle and talking to a cybersecurity team, maybe an insider threat team, and understanding how did they do, how does the forensics team do investigations, and are there tools that might help us from an identification perspective, not boil the ocean, but get at the heart again of how people actually work, to inform a reasonable legal hold versus, like I said, a kind of a boil the ocean approach.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Obviously, the data mapping discussion has continued. Some great comments by Tom, Hans, and Debbie in the chat. So yeah, definitely some considerations there. Maybe shift gears here. Bobby, how do you think the lack of federal statutes for data privacy and AI and the patchwork of state laws in their place have complicated eDiscovery for organizations?
Yeah, in a nutshell, on the privacy side, they've been complicating things for us for nearly a decade now, since GDPR. On the AI side, we're starting to see some complications, and we're going to start to see some additional. But I would say the absence of a unified federal framework, and this is both on AI and privacy, as we know, forces organizations to navigate really a patchwork of state laws, each with its own definitions in terms of what is PII, what's the definition of personal data, sensitive personal information, what kind of requirements do you need to put on certain types of sensitive information, personal information, the requirements, the enforcement mechanisms. And that creates uncertainty, right? That's the worst thing that you want when you're talking, when you're in the litigation context. And it increases compliance costs. So for eDiscovery, it really means that the data collection and processing and cross-border transfer process, it has to be tailored to the jurisdictional nuances which underlie the data. And that complicates workflows and increases the risk of inadvertent violations of data protection laws, quite simply. The same applies to AI, right? In the absence of federal action, which we're not going to see anytime soon, policy making is shifting back toward more state-specific laws, as we're seeing, from consumer protection laws to laws that are focused on AI model providers. But basically, it's going to require companies to navigate a complex web of state-specific and international AI laws, some of which, as I said, will address consumer-facing issues such as disclosures, bias mitigation, transparency. So it will be interesting to see the cascading effects of that in the eDiscovery context. I'm already starting to see that in wearing my hat as AI governance counselor, reviewing contracts and SaaS agreements and all of that in terms of the requirements that I want. But we'll certainly start to feel more of it. We already start feeling it in the AI counseling context. I think we'll start to feel more of it in the eDiscovery context as well, as things become more clear over the next couple of years in terms of which way the legislation will shake out.
Hopefully they become more clear over the next couple of years. I guess we'll hope so at least. So Brandon, obviously everybody here cares about education because they're attending this webinar, but how do you extend education past the eDiscovery bubble and educate the masses on things like legal hold best practices?
So I guess I have to say, like, well, they could order the book, but but seriously, I think yeah, I think as we've talked about already that eDiscovery and those things that the types of processes that we do in eDiscovery and the functions of eDiscovery are getting extended across they touch more areas of the organization. And so I love initiatives like Legal Data Intelligence Initiative. I think that's a great place where we're starting to that would be relevant to a lot of people other than just eDiscovery people. And so we're starting, people who are in maybe legal ops or, other, attorneys and that are in-house or even, outside counsel in terms of, like Bob, you mentioned, like a counseling practice where you're going in and educating a client on this kind of stuff. But I think the other thing is, we look at, you can kind of look at like compliance training, right? And, the video-based compliance training that we all love. And, it's not always, the best content, not Oscar winning or anything, but I think, it's something that just has to happen, right? We have to teach people about our codes of conduct and whatnot. But as, legal holds, especially as verdicts get more out of control in litigation, this stuff is important. And I think it's as important as a code of conduct. And so you could think about it in a couple of ways. One is, maybe giving employees a little bit of a heads up of what a legal hold is and what it means to be on one before you get added to the legal hold and before the clock is ticking on preservation. And then the other piece would be really educating them. I mean, I would advise everybody to take a look at your templates that you're using, right? How up to date are they? When was the last time they were updated? And does it take into account that work-life integration? And I don't know how many, there were several opinions that I've read, in the last probably 12 to 18 months around, mobile device data not being preserved properly on a custodian's device, right? They may not even know that they need to do that. And if your custodian interview isn't until day 31, might be too late, right? So, those are the kinds of things that, we just need to do a better job of educating, and maybe even video, right, is a better way to reach people now than a 6-page memo drafted by lawyers. For the average employee, a quick video from someone in the discovery team saying, hey, you're on legal hold. This is what that means. Nothing scary. Here's what we have to do. If you use your phone for communication, right, here's what you do. And that might be something that could be then attached to those notifications and might improve just compliance generally, I think.
Yeah, no, those are great points. So Nirav, during our prep call, you talked about the 1% problem and the hype around it versus the reality of what organizations are facing. So could you discuss an example of that?
Sure. I mean, I think it kind of touches what we were talking about before, right? In when something new comes out, when there's a new problem or new issue, I think we get laser focused on that, right? So using something like cloud attachments, link documents, whatever phrase you want to use to describe that scenario, that is not necessarily in all companies a problem that is a big problem, right? There might be companies and there might be situations where very few people are using that. So yes, it is the new problem, and it is technologically something that we're all working to solve. But at the same time, you don't want to forget about what are the meat and potatoes of your data sources and what you're doing. Don't lose sight of, hey, maybe this client of mine or this company is still very email heavy, or this company is very much into using some kind of collaboration tool, and they don't use email as much, right? So there are still data sources, and I would argue or posit that the majority of our data is still resides in sources that we are comfortable with and that we know how to use and we know how to work with. So let's not lose sight of that, and let's not forget, let's not devote 80% of our resources to 20% of the problems, right? Let's make sure that we are still meeting our table stakes, which is if you show up and say, hey, I have figured out how to, preserve and collect and produce the real-time version of this linked document. And they're like, great, but did you put the mailbox on hold? And we're like, oh, crap, we forgot that. Or, oh, we forgot how to do basic email and OneDrive discovery. Like you're going to end up in problems. So yes, let's make sure we're educating ourselves. Let's make sure that we are understanding how people work in the new ways and the new tools. But again, let's not lose sight of the foundational stuff, the stuff that we do know how to work with. Let's make sure we're doing that right. And then we can move on to the new and exciting and fun challenges.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, and I like the term table stakes because I think that's a good way to describe it. Question from the audience. How do you deal with the fine balance between asking custodians to acknowledge the hold notice and the phishing data security aspect where users are trained not to click on suspicious links? How do you make sure that they can feel that communicate to them that they can trust these links that they're getting to with regards to acknowledging legal holds? Any thoughts from anybody, any of you?
I think, Doug, it goes back to a training perspective. This is all, I think Brandon touched on it earlier. There's a cyber training aspect to it. There's a legal hold training aspect to it. So it shouldn't come as a surprise when you have a legal hold tool internally and you're getting a notification. And then there should be at the cybersecurity level mechanisms built in where users can verify whether this is at an appropriate link and verified in that manner. So I don't see that being a particularly big problem, assuming the proper training and cybersecurity and legal hold training is in place.
Yeah.
And I did want to just echo what Nirav just said, because I think it's so important wearing your proportionality lens. I think we often have like extreme cases coming out, and then we have this knee-jerk reaction like, oh my God, the world's going to end. And that 80-20 rule is so important, and not forgetting about the key data sources, because it's not that one file that's going to kill you, that one hyperlink you couldn't get, but missing an entire mailbox or not preserving an entire mailbox, that could get you in some serious trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it seems like a lot of the cases we're seeing where hyperlinks are being kind of discussed, in many of them, they're coming down to kind of a cooperative approach where they're identifying the most important hyperlink files and requesting those, and not necessarily saying every last one, but specific ones. So definitely, we should move. Oh, go ahead, Nirav.
I was going to tack on one more thing to the concept of the phishing and the legal hold. I think if let's not miss a common sense solution, which is put some language in there. If you suspect this to be phishing, please reach out to the legal department, and don't put a link. Either put just an email address and say, please email this person, a contact link, or reach out to cybersecurity. Acknowledge that people are concerned about phishing because they're getting bombarded with all these phishing tests and emails and whatnot, and just offer them a very simple solution. If you're concerned, reach out to someone and make sure those people are trained to say, yes, this is a valid email. Right. So
yes, absolutely.
Again, let's not lose sight of the simple solutions to, some of these problems.
Right. Yeah. The wording of the legal hold notification is extremely important, and that includes all aspects for sure. So we've already alluded to the fact that the left side of the EDRM has become more important in recent years. And in fact, EDRM is currently underway right now with the EDRM 2.0 project to update its iconic model. And one of the drivers of the decision to do so that was cited by EDRM when they started the project was the emphasis of the move to the left. So Nirav, from a corporate in-house perspective, what are you looking to accomplish in the early phases of eDiscovery?
Identification and is probably the biggest stage, and that involves identifying the facts, the key facts, identifying the key custodians, talking to them, right? again, I'm kind of a broken record, but let's not forget the old ways of doing things, which is talking to people, right? Yes, we can interrogate data all day long, and we can, we can throw all kinds of technology at it, but you could also just interview a custodian. There's a lot of value still left in that. And because at the end of the day, we want to win our case, right? We want to dispose of it, or we want to know how much to settle it for. And a lot of the times you do all of that before the middle of the EDRM, right? You might even do that before collection. You might get to identification, preservation, and settlement, or identification, preservation, and motion and summary judgment. So, we do need to focus on that. And I think understanding and partnering with your outside counsel to say, what is our actual goal here and what is the fastest and best way, which for a corporation almost always is, how do we get rid of this case?
Absolutely. Yeah. People think, well, we have to streamline the downstream processes. What about just avoiding them altogether? Even better, right? So, with that in mind, Nirav talking earlier about a provider disconnect with corporate incentives. What needs to happen for providers to align more with those incentives?
Yeah, so it makes me think of kind of the trend I've seen over the last year or so, and started before that, but I think just the last round of conferences, obviously lots of talk about AI, right? And most of that AI is being deployed at the review stage. So if I'm trying to avoid altogether, and maybe I'm looking for ways that I can either streamline costs or try to get at strategic dispositive documents as quickly as possible, or arm my outside counsel with what they need to make those burden arguments, proportionality arguments, like all the kind of stuff that I need to do in preparation, either for review or to try to avoid it. I think we're getting to this point where we need to deploy AI at the source as much as possible, and I think not to scare people into thinking this is let's again try to boil the ocean, and every single email is going to get read by an LLM, and we can ask questions and all of that. Like, I think we've got to take a little bit more thoughtful approach to that, but I think we'll get to that in terms of the last bullet, but there are also ways to do things like AI categorization to future-proof. I think we have talked about how, yes, the contemporaneous version of a document created 2 years ago probably not going to make or break an outcome of a case. It might be super annoying because you got to go back and get those. It's like death by 1,000 cuts when you find them in review. But I think the data being created today is the data that we're going to be discovering in cases 2 years from now. So thinking about future-proofing your eDiscovery strategy might be prudent at this point as we start to see the technology trend changes, because the legal industry typically is going to lag corporate data trends, right? The new emerging hot product right now at all the tech conferences is not going to be an eDiscovery topic for a while, right? Like, it's going to take some time for that to catch up because user behavior has to reach critical mass before, again, it becomes as ubiquitous as a OneDrive or a mailbox. I think in clients that we're working with, we don't see hyperlinks as the primary form of sharing information in emails, right? It's still attachments, but the growth of it, especially in chat, like in Teams or Slack, is alarming enough that I would want to get ahead of that before 2 years from now I'm going back and like, okay, now everybody's asking for the contemporaneous version because now it's shifted from maybe 10% of the attachments are hyperlinks to now it's maybe 40 or 50%. So anyway, I think that we need to start focusing on that left side and optimizing it and giving in-house and really for the ability to give it to outside counsel as well, giving insight as quickly as possible. We're back to that early, the concept of early case assessment, right? But doing that in a way that is more strategic, and not just about giving you a graph of, or a timeline or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, when we see an issue start to hit case law, like hyperlink files has, that's obviously an indication of, maybe some attention needs to be paid to it. Getting some great comments and questions. We will circle back to the question that Kyle has in a bit, but we want to go ahead and plug through a bit more here. So Bobby, Brandon just alluded to a couple of AI things. How are you utilizing AI and other emerging technologies on the left side of the EDRM to reduce downstream costs for your clients?
Yeah, I can say, Doug, with quite confidence, over the last year or so, there's been a big push, particularly from our more forward-thinking, tech-savvy clients, to use AI tools, emerging technology tools on the left side of the EDRM to reduce cost and risk, and on the right side, downstream collection, review, and production side, which is obviously still the most expensive side because that's where you get outside counsel and lawyers involved. And I've been counseling clients in various ways. This is including, I think Brandon alluded to this, leveraging AI classification tools to identify sensitive, privileged, potentially even responsive content that keeps getting repurposed early in the record creation lifecycle. So as records are created in the ordinary course of business, they're classified, using retention labels to help enforce defensible deletion policies, and reducing the volume of data potentially subject to hold, and ensuring proper treatment of sensitive documents in downstream litigation. We've been using cyber and endpoint tools to allow us to actually help with certain data mapping that allows us to identify redundant or obsolete data silos, which in the end help streamline defensible deletion and help us focus on what matters most from a preservation and collection standpoint in the eDiscovery context. So I think these technologies, which shift the work upstream, have a tremendous impact in terms of reducing the cost and complexity of downstream review and production. I do think we're at the early stages of this, and this ties into Kyle's questions. If you don't mind me just getting into that and just addressing that, because I think the two are linked. M365, that's obviously a big repository for many organizations, and I can say in terms of the top one or two tips, at least on the left side of the EDRM model, is understand what you're getting by your various licensing components, right? An E3 license versus an E5 license. Clients have often been surprised where they didn't have certain functionality or certain things didn't work the way they thought they would work, and it ended up being a licensing issue. And then two, testing, because no matter what is published in terms of what is supposed to happen, that does not necessarily mean that's what's in fact going to happen. So understand and your licensing and test the underlying capabilities in a small kind of beta POC environment. Those would be my top two kind of tips in terms of the M365 platform.
Yeah, no, those are great tips, Bobby. And since you brought up the question, I'll mention a great resource. Greg Buckles has the eDiscovery Journal website, and he keeps track of the Microsoft roadmap as it deals with eDiscovery related updates. And he puts out a monthly roadmap update, or at least most months, which is great because once the things are addressed on the roadmap, they tend to fall off the roadmap and you can't get to them anymore. So he kind of preserves those, and not only provides the list of them, but also provides his take on the eDiscovery impacts of that. So eDiscoveryjournal.com, great resource to check out to keep up with Microsoft 365 changes. So Brandon, real quick, what's a legal data cache and how can it help organizations become more proactive in eDiscovery?
Yeah, so this is a concept that we are starting to talk with customers about, and we have a information governance platform, but it's for the legal data cache. Or the concept is that there are we can kind of predict which maybe certain individuals that, you could even look at your current legal holds, right? Do you have certain individuals that get applied to multiple legal holds, or certain like high risk groups? I used to be in sales, so I have no problem saying that sales can be a high risk group for litigation for various reasons. But you could take a look at those folks, and you can look at the eDiscovery subreddit, and at least once a month or more, there's a horror story about something not working in Purview. Some kind of export didn't work or something. And I'm not trying to bash Microsoft. I'm only saying that I think this goes back to what Bobby was saying, and understanding and knowing what functionality is going to be there and how it's going to work, and testing before you're doing live production stuff. But that is a frequently changing thing, right? So legal data cache gives you a way to not only get that data in a place where you can export it much faster, but you can do some of that AI categorization in place, and you can separate out the rot data or the system generated emails, or you can mine those system generated emails for, welcome to Asana. Thank you for creating your account, Nirav. And now, okay, boom, data source, right? Like I can gain some insight from that data and start to understand where people are working. I can also future proof. So one of the things that we do, and I suspect other platforms will do this in the future, is as emails are sent, if they're being cached or they're being sent to the legal data cache, we detect the hyperlink and go get the contemporaneous version at that moment and store it as an attachment basically alongside the email, so that 2 years from now, when you want to go and export that information, you can export the contemporaneous version without having to go search for it or worrying about version roll off or any of those things, right? And again, this would be done for kind of key individuals or key groups. There could be organizations that have a workforce that is, one group is kind of the corporate headquarters workforce, and the other group is more distributed out at locations, warehouses, stores, that kind of thing. You would probably focus on those knowledge workers that are high data creators, right? Lots of email, lots of OneDrive, lots of documents. Cache those, and then that will streamline everything else. And you can use that AI categorization to reduce some of the rot and other data that kind of gets sent downstream. And instead of having to get filtered out later with search terms, we just filter it at the source.
Okay. Yep. Great. So just have a few minutes left, but we certainly want to try to get to some of these considerations, and potential approaches and solutions. So, Nirav, in our prep call, you mentioned case-specific playbooks. What are those, and what's an effective approach to creating case-specific playbooks that are meaningful and useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is that, one size doesn't fit all, right? So you might have different playbooks for your employment cases. You might have different playbooks for your regulatory responses. You might have different playbooks for different kinds of matters. And I think, yes, they will be, some of the core steps and processes will be the same, but then there will be configurations. And I think, from the corporate perspective, and if you're outside counsel partnering with your client, I wouldn't push the one playbook fits all. And at the same time, you don't want 100. But I think it is reasonable to have multiple playbooks for different kinds of matters.
Yeah, makes sense. So, Bobby, in our prep call, you talked about the rise of the data attorney. So, what does that mean, and how does that impact your eDiscovery practice?
Thanks, Doug. So I think you talked earlier about the data explosion that we're witnessing, we're experiencing, particularly since the pandemic. And I think that's really transformed the traditional eDiscovery practice as we know it. We are no longer just eDiscovery lawyers. Nirav touched on this earlier. I think we're data lawyers handling our clients' most complex data problems, including providing guidance on these new and emerging sources that Brandon mentioned. So I think of myself as a data-first lawyer, a tech and data lawyer. And as such, I straddle the line in various practice groups and sectors, advise clients on AI, data privacy, digital forensics, eDiscovery, and cybersecurity issues, both in and out of high-stakes litigation, not necessarily all the time in high-stakes litigation, sometimes just in the purely counseling capacity. So it's really the lawyer that wears multiple hats and works across practice groups to handle and address some of their clients' most complex data problems, I would say, and challenges.
Okay. Speaking of data, you're one of the founding members of the Legal Data Intelligence Initiative. So for those who in the audience who don't know, what is LDI and how can it help provide solutions to some of the challenges we've discussed?
So thanks for the plug there. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, as you know, Doug, as one of the founding members. And, that's the LDI. It's both the framework and an initiative. It's a framework that provides models and toolkits for the legal industry to solve legal data challenges. And also separately, it's a professional community that seeks to help legal data professionals provide new, growing, and exciting opportunities. As we just talked about, we're wearing multiple hats now, these days. So we don't necessarily need to just be pigeonholed into one area or the other. We can have cross-functional responsibilities. In my view, the LDI initiative is, think of it as a problem-solving workflow as well, in addition to the professional side of it. Designed for legal professionals across the various fields that I mentioned: eDiscovery, data privacy, AI. We have an M&A component, and there's one common theme. It's how do you address the legal data challenges associated with those areas, right? And the core objectives for all these professionals and for LDI is really, first, uncover the insights, patterns, and themes buried in vast treasure troves data volumes. Second, help your clients solve their most complex challenges in the most effective and efficient and cost-effective, to be clear, manner. And third, allow the data professionals to expand their knowledge, areas of expertise, and career prospects. So those, I think, are the three pillars of LDI. Again, I look at it as both a framework and an initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And a whole bunch of use cases that as part of the LDI site, and it really kind of the way you all break those down is terrific. So not only do we have to think about InfoGov, but we also have to think about AI governance. So Bobby, what do we mean by AI governance, and could you provide an example of where AI governance needs to be applied?
Sure. So this is just another kind of offshoot of the data problems. I would say, in my practice today, probably 30% of my practice now is focused on just AI governance outside of anything to do with eDiscovery. And when we say AI governance, we refer to a framework of policies, procedures, controls that organizations to put in place to ensure that they're using it ethically, compliantly, effectively, and safely. The framework establishes the overall protocols and really the AI vision and application for the organization. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. Every organization may be different in terms of how they view AI, but their overall policies should basically follow what they feel is their AI vision and how they're rolling out AI across their organization. It's aimed to mitigate risks, ensure compliance with laws and regulations that we talked about earlier, ensuring AI systems operate in a manner that's ethical, explainable, so they maintain public trust to both internal stakeholders as well as external customers or consumers. And I think the final point I want to raise about AI governance, it is just like many of the other things we do, look at it from the proactive lens. Companies developing or deploying AI models or tools with, particularly with Gen AI capabilities, should really adopt a proactive approach to compliance, especially as we talked about, Doug, with the broader AI legislation continuing to reshape what we're doing. Reacting in this area, much like the InfoGov area, can be costly and inefficient and have devastating consequences down the line. So, think about a lot of the same best practices that we apply in InfoGov, and it actually applies and carries over to the AI governance world as well.
Yes, and I think you're right. I think it is legaldataintelligence.org, not .com, right? I think I misspoke on the website there. So I'm going to circle back really quick, Bobby. I know we're about to lose you, so I'm going to ask a question for you, then kind of get to a slide here, and then get Nirav's and Brandon's take on this. Can you give me a final takeaway for a recommendation on what organizations should do to start doing to help establish a more foundational approach to e-discovery that's more proactive and less reactive?
Sure, I'll hit on 4 or 5 points that we've already touched on. 1, invest in cross-functional education to build shared understanding and knowledge base. Try to create defensible data maps and update them regularly. It doesn't have to be perfection. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Adapt proactive legal hold strategies that are integrated with your IT systems. Embrace AI and automation. It's actually a good thing for us, but have a sound governance approach attached to it. And finally, for the eDiscovery folks out there, treat discovery as a strategic opportunity, not just a reactive obligation or a chore. And I promise you, your day will go by much quicker.
All right. That was 4 quick points. Thanks, Bobby. Nirav, I'll ask you the same question.
I mean, I don't know that I could follow up Bobby's excellent summary. But yeah, I mean, just again, reiterate what he had to say, and don't forget about the foundation, right? I mean, we are still have to maintain the foundation of the house, to use Brandon's example. There's a lot of value there. There's a lot of benefit there. And, let's not all chase the new shiny thing in lieu of, again, where we might get more value.
All right. All right, Brandon, I'll ask you the question, then I'll also ask you to briefly touch on this slide.
Yeah, sure. So in response to the question, I'll go back to what I said earlier about the, understanding, what's changed since maybe the last time the legal hold process was updated, and is this template, is the information we're giving the custodians really arm them to assist in that process. All the data is not always in the cloud, or if it is, it's not always your cloud. So we need to properly educate custodians, but also taking that time to step across those aisles and talk to the business leaders in IT, really understand how data moves in the organization today, and then start. We're not talking about boiling the ocean with a data map, but for those core stuff, I think we said like mailboxes, OneDrive, right? The core things, understand them, understand how they work, understand how the data is exported, how it's preserved, make sure you are preserving everything you think you're preserving. Take some time to maybe do that research project, to do that POC, and measure the results so that you are armed with that information when you moving forward. And then as things change, we've got Greg's website to go and keep up with those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about emerging solutions to help address left side EDRM processes like legal hold, Case Fusion from Cloudficient is a solution designed to address those issues. So Brandon, quickly, what would you like to say about Case Fusion and how folks can try it out?
Yeah, so we, Case Fusion does a lot. It is purely a left side EDRM solution, identification, preservation, and soon collection. But we saw a gap, especially with Microsoft announcing that legal hold notification would be deprecated with the new changes to Purview, and just some other solutions maybe not getting as much in the way of innovation over the years. We decided to create a new edition of Case Fusion that basically takes the legal hold notification functionality and gives you a way to try the platform with just that functionality at a super competitive price point. The goal being that like every organization should have access to legal hold notification. And you can do that with Case Fusion, and it's got all the features that the top leading other other legal hold solutions would have. It is fully featured, but at a great price point. And then once that's deployed, you could later implement some of the other pieces. And so we have the landing page, cloudficient.com/legalhold, is where you can go to check that out and talk to us about getting that deployed if you want to make a change, or if you're still using spreadsheets and want to get an automated solution to help manage legal holds. Case Fusion would be a great option.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. All right, I want to thank our panelists, Nirav, Bobby, and Brandon for their terrific insights today. And thank you all for attending today's webinar on the ACEDS webinar channel and for the terrific questions and comments. I see Mike there, so I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, to close us out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on the ACEDS webinar channel today. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Nirav. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, of course, eDiscovery Today. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe at eDiscoverytoday.com. And please visit aceds.org for a complete list of upcoming webinars. Have a great day, everyone, and be kind to one another.
Thanks, everybody.